Let's run through the 10 players the Chiefs could be targeting in the first round of the 2016 NFL Draft. First, start with the quarterback, Paxton Lynch of Memphis. He has a lot of qualities you look for in an NFL caliber starter. He's big, he's got a quick release, and he's got a good arm. He's just raw, but a coach like Andy Reid could probably get the best out of him. The problem is a lot of other teams see the kind of talent he has, and it seems like he'll be off the board by the time the Chiefs pick at number 28 in the first round. Now let's go to receiver. There's 4 really good receivers at the top of this draft, and Laquan Treadwell from Ole Miss, Will Fuller from Notre Dame, Josh Dotson from Texas Christian, and Corey Coleman from Baylor, not necessarily in that order. It is conceivable that one of those guys will be there in the first round for the Chiefs. The problem is Andy Reid and John Dorsey haven't really shown a proclivity to drafting receivers in the first round during their time in the league. It's kind of been a rarity for them, so it seems like they would use the first round pick on other positions of need, particularly on the offensive and defensive lines, which seems to be where they prefer to use their first round picks. Speaking of the offensive line, Cody Whitehair from Kansas State. He'd fill a needed guard. Right now the Chiefs are looking at projected starters of Ja Reed and Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. Ja Reed looked pretty good in his 2 games at guard, but Tardif, while he has all the physical tools in the world, still has a little ways to go to develop as a player. If the Chiefs wanted to upgrade the guard position, they could draft a player like Whitehair or even Josh Garnett of Stanford. They're 2 different players. Whitehair is more of a zone blocking type. He's really good at getting to the second level. Garnett, meanwhile, is a physical mauler. I mean, he dominates at the point of attack, but he's not as athletic as Whitehair. One of those guys could potentially fill in at left guard or right guard, and it could be a true competition, with the loser being somebody that can be a swing player on the line. It's never bad to have backup in this league. Now let's move on to safety. Carl Joseph from West Virginia. Joseph is a really good player. He's fast, he has great range, he hits you. He's got all the tools you want in a star safety. Problem is he's 5'10", barely, and 205 pounds, and he's coming off a knee injury. So he might miss a few games to start the season. Teams have to ask themselves if they want to take a chance on a little guy in the first round, even one who has all those great traits. If Joseph doesn't go in the first round, those are the reasons why. But if the Chiefs were to draft Joseph, it would really free them up to be a little more aggressive in the front 7, knowing that he could clean up some mistakes. And it would also free up Eric Berry to sniff around the box and do what he does best. Now let's move to the 2 positions that are probably the most likely to be addressed, defensive line and corner. Let's start with defensive line. There are some really intriguing prospects on the defensive line this year. While this draft isn't terribly deep, it is deep at this position, interior defensive line. Robert Kimdiche from Mississippi is one of the draft's most gifted players. In some games, he looked like a top 5 talent. In other games, he just disappeared. And there's some questions about his mentality as a football player, whether or not he really loves the game. And all his off-field issues, too. He's had those. But if the Chiefs are comfortable enough with those things, they might feel that he's worth a risk at number 28 if he's still there. They could bring him into a pretty good locker room in Kansas City and try and get the most out of him. Remember, Andy Reid's never been afraid to give guys second chances. Other interior defensive linemen to consider are Vernon Butler from Louisiana Tech, who's raw but big. He's 6'4", 320 pounds, with really long arms, and we know John Dorsey likes that. He's just very gifted, and he has a lot of moldable tools. With a good defensive line coach, they could probably get that out of him. And also Chris Jones from Mississippi State, the same thing. He's even bigger than Butler at 6'6", 310. And he's very athletically gifted. He just didn't put it on tape every week. But those are 2 guys that could provide depth along the defensive line and also protect them in case Dontari Poe's back starts acting up or he leaves via free agency next year. Other defensive linemen to consider maybe in the second round include Austin Johnson from Penn State, Kenny Clark from UCLA, and Javon Hargrave from South Carolina State. Now let's get to cornerback. The loss of Sean Smith definitely hurts. It's not ideal, but the Chiefs do have Phillip Gaines and they do have Steven Nelson, and those are 2 players they drafted in the 3rd round the last 3 years. But if they decide to add to this position, knowing that they have a good starter in Marcus Peters, there are some guys available. Eli Apple from Ohio State is 6'1", 200 pounds, and he runs fast. He's probably going to go in the first round, and he probably won't be on the board, even though he's raw. William Jackson III from Houston, very gifted player. He's got a real knack for going to get the ball in the air, but it's going to be interesting to see if teams value that more than Apple's physical ability. I mocked the Chiefs' Apple in my latest mock draft, and I was surprised he lasted there. So there's a scenario in which Apple could be on the board, and the Chiefs have to choose between Apple and Jackson. One other cornerback to consider in the mix here is Artie Burns from Miami. Burns is really gifted, and he had 6 interceptions this year. He just wasn't coached terribly well. A lot of those Miami guys just didn't get the kind of coaching other programs give their players. So you know you're going to have to coach them up, but there's a high ceiling there. Well, guys, that's all I've got for you today. Please continue to go to kansascity.com for all your Chiefs news, especially as we go through the draft process this year. Thanks for listening.